Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Still Peaking, where we talk about career changes and people who have taken very non-linear paths in their lives. And today we have Ellie Tiglao, who was first introduced to me as one of the coolest people that I will ever meet. And I think that has held true, actually. So Ellie started off her career as a neuroscience researcher, then turned arts director, and then ran her own James Beard nominated restaurant. And so she has done it all. Thank you so much for joining me, Ellie.
Thanks for having me, Maggie. I'm going to have a lot of fun here.
Yes, I'm excited. I would love to maybe just start from your career as a neuroscience researcher because you majored in art history, which I feel is they're so unrelated.
Right. So in college, during undergrad, I started as an art and art history major. And during that process, I ended up taking a lot of math and science classes that I really loved and were also beyond what was minimum. Like it was calculus and biology that I didn't need to do. And I realized I really loved it, especially after hearing a neuroscience professor talk about his research and realized what was really interesting to me was this intersection of hard sciences and softer sciences psychology. And so it's very unrelated to art. I did end up majoring in neuroscience and kind of taking that all the way. But what was something that was a weird aside, I found in science actually a lot of people who had a lot of different interests. In my own group, we had somebody who was a woodblock print artist as well as a PhD, and he ended up doing all of our art for that ended up in our published papers. So
Mhm.
it's kind of interesting to see all the different kind of inspirations that people pull in.
Yeah. And what did you about studying neuroscience or what compelled you to make that change?
Yeah, I think really for me, it was just really diving in deep into a field that there wasn't a lot known about. I think there's a lot of personalities out there. I'm a certain way. I love being on the edge of things. I want to know what's happening. I want to get to the answer that other people don't know first. And so at the time that I was coming into neuroscience, it was this new field that was emerging. And we were doing a lot of work with epigenetics, which at the time was really different. And if you've never
Yeah.
heard of it before, we've had this whole idea about how we are already wired a certain way. We have our genes, and that's just what they are. But it's actually not the case. They change over your lifetime, and you can have different impact on that and make your life better by using epigenetics. So that was woven into our research as well. So I just really
Right.
loved how it brought together all different sorts of sciences to come up with something new.
And to touch on your epigenetics part, I always thought it was so fascinating because they had all this research around twins where you have the same DNA, but based on how you grew up and your different experiences, your genetics can affect your behavior or even the way you look. Where I think there was one study where it's if you had a period of time in your life where you did not have enough food, your body type will skew always towards skinny, no matter like how well fed you are in your later years or all these things. And something that I don't talk about much is I did neuroscience in
Mm-hmm.
college as well. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I'll get canceled for this, but a lot of neuroscience is related to how your chemical composition affects your outward behavior. And so we did a lot of psychostimulant research and addiction with cocaine and pharmaceuticals and things. And so we did work with animals. So we worked with rats specifically. And our PI was named PETA's vivisectionist of the month. I think one year, and she would just get tons of hate mail, even years after, just from animal
Gosh.
rights and PETA activists about all the things that we were doing research on animals. Um,
Yeah. It's definitely a big part of it. I mean, you're talking about things that I've definitely thought about and just, oh, dang, I'm not sure what kind of hate mail we may have gotten, but we ended up doing procedures that are not often approved by the IRB, which is the board that decides whether or not you can do a certain experiment with rats and mice as well. So
yeah.
yeah, even We actually also used ourselves as test subjects. We had a few experiments that required blood samples, and we all gave blood in our lab for the
Compliantly or non-compliantly?
compliantly.
What was the most interesting thing that you worked on in neuroscience?
Yeah, so I think I left soon after we published a paper in Science. We had found a new type of white blood cell, type of B cell that did things that weren't others. So even though I was a neuroscientist, I was actually in the field of neuroimmunology, and my contribution was really around cerebral spinal fluid and some novel processes around that. But I think what was really exciting about that was just more the whole process of it. The finding a new type of white blood cell just meant that in order to say that, we needed to show that there was no other way that it could be something else. Is
Yeah.
this just a weird artifact, or just all of that work to make sure that this was true? And doing it over a short period of time. It's not exactly neuroscience related, but what I thought was really interesting about that space was that it was run a business actually. So there was a center director. He made sure that you had all the supplies you need, and if you were in his lab, then he got to say what happened in it, and he was the last author usually on the
Right.
paper. But he made it so that we ran these pretty short, almost sprint cycles, and were able to produce a lot in that lab. It was a lot of hard work though. So I think 80 hours a week was no joke. We were in the
Right.
lab every day, Monday through Sunday, actually.
Just lab rats with lab rats.
Basically, yeah. So I lived at that lab, but I loved it. I learned a lot about everything from, of course, that whole life cycle of what it means to get a paper to publication, but also how you think about the economics of a lab,
Hmm.
and also a lot of relationship building. One of the biggest
Right.
thing contributions I had to my lab that was actually prototyping, so working with our collaborators and kind of
Hmm.
determining if there was a worthwhile sort of project there.
And you were pretty deep into your, I mean, neuroscience research career where you were doing research at UCLA and then Harvard Medical School. And then how did you go from that to arts directing?
Oh yeah, that is a little harder to answer. I think it mostly just came out of community. So I had known about EMW, this arts tech and community culture space in Boston that was meant for Asian Pacific Islander folks. And I ended up doing a pop up there actually, and in that work and having conversations with them, they were in the cycle of looking to replace a programs director, and because of the work that I more the work that I had done previously in college with arts groups, that became an avenue for me. And what I loved about that was really being the supportive leader. I had 9 programs, all with leads, and all of them needed to support around how to think about what they really wanted out of what they were doing, what support they needed, and what we needed to do to see their project grow. So,
Hmm.
yeah, that was a lot of fun and ended up giving me a lot of time with a lot of different kinds of artists, a lot of people doing all sorts of different creative things, and opened that door actually to what became Tanam later.
Was it so was the arts directing something that you did on the side while you were still doing research? Or was it one day you just decided, okay, I'm done with research. I'm going to do this instead?
Yeah, speaking of transitions, that one was a tough one. It was always something that I thought was I was going to do for the rest of my life. And I left probably when I was around 7, and I had spent a lot of time in it. And what ended up happening is because of how much time I was spending there, I was actually putting a lot of pressure on my body, and it was actually a medical thing that got me out of it, which
Hmm.
was I just ended up having some heart things happen, and it just gave me a little bit more perspective on I love what I'm doing here, and also I need to think about my health and my well-being. And so it provided an exit, and it's something that I didn't mean to walk away from that way, but because I had this like health thing come up, it ended up giving me a little bit space to think about how it fit in my life. And so
Hmm.
yeah, I think for me, maybe interesting for folks to know, Harvard is a whole other machine. I think if I had stayed in California, who knows what would have happened. But for folks who don't know that much about research, it's usually when you end up working for an institution that you'll end up getting some money to do stuff, and you'll get a lab and maybe some help getting people to work with you. But Harvard's not that. They're basically get your own money. You get the privilege of being here. And so there was a lot of pressure to keep publishing. That
Yeah.
idea of publish or perish was huge at Harvard. And so I think it just meant we were operating on a timeline that was very different from others. So yeah, pacing, thinking about moderation so that you can survive the long haul, I think
Hmm.
is definitely something I didn't think about before I entered the lab at HMS.
Do you think if your health had remained good, you would have stayed?
That's a hard question to ask or think about, because it was definitely something I hadn't thought about leaving, but I know how I was starting to feel about it, which was a little disillusioned. I don't know, I was a little naive. I think it taught me a lot about I talked about it teaching me about economics. I never really realized how big a part that played in the decision making that was happening. And so I was I was young and just thought, oh yeah, scientists, they just want to learn things and they want to spread that knowledge, but it's a lot more than that. There's prestige, there's see, there's money.
Yeah. Was there any sort of politicking when you worked there?
Yes. I think my first day there was very memorable because I think I spent 6 hours in a meeting between all of these senior leaders in the group, determining strategy around how to respond to comments coming back from a paper that was submitted. So we had submitted a paper. Usually, what happens is some sort of group of experts that the publication picks will review it and then give you sort of feedback on what you need to improve for this to become worthy of publishing. It was before we were able to hear about what the questions actually were. So we were trying to guess at who might be on the board, what sorts of things might they be likely to ask, how can we bait people with certain experiments so that if they notice that and it's missing a part, we'll have already have had the experiments on deck to show them that this thing actually works. So it was really really interesting. And also, of course, there's just a lot of high powered, very well known scientists that are there. And so everyone's got their own lane, but also everyone's just wants to feel they're better than everybody else. So that's the vibe. It's
Hmm.
very intense. It's really inspiring though, because there's just so many people who are thinking about things in a lot of different ways. But
Yeah.
I just don't think that environment was the one that was for me.
And when you left, did you feel, I mean, because maybe it was primarily due to health reasons, did you feel this sense of loss of having to let go of something that had been with you for so long?
My doctor gave me a health note, or a note to take to my employer that said that she felt I needed to stop for 20 days. But when I got this note that I could rest for 20 days, I was actually relieved. I didn't know, though. Of course, it was going to mean that I was not going to work there anymore, because we were in the middle of a lot of big things and I would have been dropping the ball on some things that we were moving forward. And so it just felt like a door that felt unfortunately closed.
And then you're like, okay, well, life goes on.
Yeah. And it's not, I thought that I might want to do something more in science. Actually, what ended up happening after that period was a lot of different work happening at the same time. So that's the period during which I started working more in restaurant around Boston. I found myself in kitchens. I also found myself in bars. And so I learned the spectrum of creation in a restaurant. At the same time, I was doing the art stuff. So both spaces were part time for me.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about what you were doing exactly in the art space?
Yeah, so I wasn't creating art. I was really supporting a lot of it. I was managing that. I had managed this arts program. I had managed arts programs for arts and culture space. I managed a gallery and an artist in residence program. And I think primarily, at least in that later work, I was focused on this sort of work that became also part of the restaurant, which was thinking about who's not getting the megaphone, who needs to be heard, and how can I prioritize art that isn't the first thing that people are going to see in an art gallery. You know, it's not always the thing that you're going to see in a gallery.
Mhm.
I think most of my work was really trying to bring in queer artists, people of color, and artists who don't normally show in galleries.
So more uplifting underrepresented voices in the art space. With the arts and the working in restaurants, did that just come out of pure you were interested in it?
Yeah, I think this is something that I've talked a little bit about with other folks. My mom is the one in particular who I've talked to about this. She calls me reckless because my tendency is to follow my curiosity. And so there wasn't there wasn't a lot of should I not? It was really this is a place where I think I can do good work. And this is a place where I can see me having some influence in how things get done. So those things I think are more important to me than anything else. I've actually in all of this have forgotten that in between science and arts, I actually did try for a hot minute to go into corporate healthcare. I actually did software education, which and yeah, I don't know, I got myself fired. I'm just not. I think the spaces that are very limiting, the ones that where you're just told to do a job and things are as they are and there's no reason to try to make it better, those are not
Mhm.
spaces that are for me.
Yeah, yeah. How did you get fired? What happened with that?
That company was really it was a startup. It was under 300 people, but they were very top down and we did a hackathon. I had recommended to my group that we rethink how we marketed what we were doing and
Hmm.
offer freemium as a thing. This was a job I feel since then that's become standard, but at the time
Yeah.
it wasn't. And the CEO hated it, hated the idea. And we got last place in the hackathon for it. But honestly, even so, I feel it really just made room for what was to come later. There's no way I
Yeah.
would have been able to do what I did later without that kind of push out because I was so hesitant to leave science. I didn't
Right.
want to leave something that felt comfortable, something that I knew I knew. And in the end, it ended up being something that didn't serve me.
I think there's often this concept of have something in your life, and if you don't set it down, you cannot make room for anything that could potentially be better. And it's what could be better? Well, you don't know, but if you don't let go of what's in front of you, you will never know. And like, sure, maybe it's worse, but you have to make room for opportunity to find you. Otherwise, it'll never find you. Yeah.
I think that also it's yeah, you're talking a little bit to this. You have to make decisions. You can't just be leaving the door open for everything. And when you make your decision, you have to be open to like what follows after that. So some of that is loss.
And I think that part's really scary because it's okay, I'm going to lose something and I don't know what's going to happen after this. Then after you commit, okay, I'm just going to shut this door and whatever comes next is going to come and I'm just going to have faith that it's going to be good.
I didn't think about losing a job in this way previously when it happened, but since
Hmm.
it happened, how I've experienced what that looks is actually when you close that door, you all of the other doors open. And
Hmm.
that's actually what's really overwhelming, right? Is actually what do I do?
Yeah. And then speaking of doors opening, I feel like we've made some references to this, but then you opened a restaurant, right? You were doing all these cooking pop-ups. So maybe let's start there. Like you were doing these cooking pop-ups. How did that happen? Why were you doing it?
Yeah, so it had happened. I guess the first pop up was really just an idea. It wasn't something born out of this thought that, oh man, I didn't really take that much time to think about it. I just thought, I miss Filipino food. I haven't had it in so long. I live in a city where I can't find it. My brother is coming to visit me and we cook together. And I know people who own a spot. They offered actually space to me without me even prompting about the pop up because they knew I cooked already. If we even roll it back just a little bit, actually, there's a history. Even when I first moved to Boston and was still in science, I used to host these dinner parties on the weekends. Every weekend, host 8 people over, all people who don't know each other, and just create space for people who are strangers to get to know each other. And that felt something supernatural to me. Not supernatural, very natural to me. And it just comes out of this history I had with, my dad's a chef, my grandmother was a chef. It's just an easy way to get people together. And so when I was thinking about this pop up, all I was thinking was, I'm going to make Filipino food. I miss this. If people show up, cool. If no one shows up, we're going to have a lot of amazing leftovers. And my brother and I put the menu together pretty quickly. He flew in from California for it, and we put out tickets for 20 people. On the day of, 28 people showed up. We made it work, but we were in a space where a lot of people were passing by, and everyone was just so curious and so intrigued by the smells and the sight of it that we had this whole long list afterwards of people who wanted to come to the next one. And so I honestly, there wasn't really a plan. There was work that I was doing, but this was continuous sort of exploration of something that wasn't really making me money in the moment, but was really feeding this need to explore and give something of value to people. I kept having this feedback loop of, okay, let's do something weird. Oh, people like that, cool. And then it just kept building in this way
Right.
because we were just experimenting all the time. Oh, why don't we do this pop up this way? Oh, this one will be a tapas sort of vibe. This one we're gonna do a little bit more traditional, etc. So what eventually became the restaurant was something that came out of experimentation in that. And so one of those experiments was something that I called less than 10, 9 courses actually. And there was a story. And something that I heard that was different from any other pop up that I'd heard before was just how much meaning it gave to people. They felt like they got a lot out of it. It was maybe their best food experience. And I just really felt, okay, I'm having a good time. Y'all are having a good time. This feels the thing. And so I didn't really know that that's what I was going to do. But after years of doing this pop up, I felt I finally found the thing that made the most sense for me to open. I wanted to do something completely out of the realm of how restaurants really operate, how they usually operate, and wanted to give people an experience that took them out of that comfortable mindset and got them ready to connect because of that disruption.
Could you talk a little bit about Tanám and what it means as a word and maybe what it means to you?
Yeah, so Tanam it was actually what we eventually called the restaurant. That idea came out of a lot of talks with a lot of different people, naming something, especially a baby, because that's definitely what it was, is something that I felt I needed to take a lot of time to think about. So in the end, we decided on this name that means cultivation or planting, rooting. It is in my language, which is a language called Kapampangan. The primary language in the Philippines is based off something called Tagalog, and the word there is different. And so I chose the name for it's always super layered for me. So I chose it because my family, I come from a family of farmers. My dad's side, they're all farmers. And so there's a lot about into ingredients and growing them. It's also connecting to my Kapampangan heritage because in the Philippines, like what region you're from is people really hold on to that. And there are big differences between different regions. And then also thinking about this idea of commitment. I'm because of my nature, I'm always looking for the thing that's interesting to me. It's meant that I've explored all sorts of things. And so, actually, around that time, around the beginning of the pop up, There was an activist, her name was Grace Lee Boggs. She's Asian American. She had died, and there was a lot of conversation about the work she'd done and what she had said. And something that I read over and over again was this quote, which was, "The most radical thing I ever did was stay put." And for me, that had a lot of meaning in what I was doing, because Boston's a hard city to live in. It's hard. People find it hard to trust others sometimes, and people are in and out. So making friends, you have to be prepared for them to go. And so I was always kind of like sitting on this edge of like, maybe I'll go someday. Who knows? And deciding to open a restaurant meant, no, we're going to make this thing a thing in Boston. I have all my relationships here, and I think I want to be here as long as it makes sense.
Yeah.
As long as we all love it still.
Yeah. And I love that concept of planting or rooting because I think, especially as children of maybe immigrants or parents who came from other countries, there's a lot of meaning to that. And with starting a restaurant, I mean, first time you've ever had a restaurant, what were some of the hardest, most unexpected things that came out of that experience?
Yeah. It's not an easy business to start. I think if you're interested
Yeah.
in making money, probably the worst decision you can make. It is possible, of course, but I think there were some unexpected challenges for me, mostly in shifting how I thought about work, actually. So because I hadn't run a restaurant before, but I grew up in the restaurant, I'd worked in restaurants. I was still coming from a science and arts background, which is very exploratory. Most people need a lot of structure in a restaurant, and all of those pieces need to be working perfectly in order for the whole thing to work. So, really digging into thinking about structure when I'm really more of a high level details. Let's think about the impossible person was maybe one of my personal biggest challenges. We also were a cooperative. So, for folks who may not know, businesses are run in lots of different ways, but there's one kind of way you can do it, which is cooperatively. Restaurants that are run cooperatively usually have the workers who are be owners as well. So I think one of the things I hadn't expected was how hard it might be to finance a project like that, just because of the barriers of people not even knowing what that meant. It's not really a common way to run a restaurant or run any business. So, for example, if you are starting a business and you need a loan, usually you can get one from the SBA. For us, we weren't able to get that loan. An SBA requires that you have to have at least 33% stake in the business. And because we had more than three owners, we were not qualified,
Hmm.
for example. I think also this is more about starting the operations of the business. We did spend a lot of time thinking about what we wanted to do, but I think we left a lot on the table for in terms of planning. And so it's a popular thing to say that you can't work on the business if you work in the business, and that's definitely true in the restaurant. You're going to be exhausted after working from 8 a.m. to 12 a.m. So you don't have a lot of time once you get started. So
Right.
I think if I was able, I think I don't regret anything that we did. I think we did a lot of amazing, cool stuff. I do think that if we had spent more time in the beginning, we would have set ourselves up better for
Hmm.
what was to come.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how did the business do? Because I remember I was visiting Boston for a business trip, right? And then
Mhm.
I brought three of my coworkers there for a dining experience, and we did the full Kamayan dinner where I think you ate with your hands, and it was several courses. And
Mhm.
even months after, they would still talk about it. And I think about it because I've never really had Filipino food outside of Senor Sisig in California or lumpia, right? And I don't even, it was just everything I had was so new and it was fun and all of it was attached to a story. So honestly, I felt so cool being able to introduce this new experience to them when it was also super new to me. So I'm curious, how was the reception of Tanam when you guys did this?
Yeah, I think I was talking about being prepared for what was to come. I think one of the biggest surprises for me, obviously you're never expecting praise, but just seeing how many people really appreciated it.
Mm-hmm.
I think we got we got a lot of more media praise. We got best restaurant of the year, concept of the year. The restaurant in its after its first year was nominated for a James Beard for best new restaurant,
Mm-hmm.
which is all across the U.S. sort of category.
Yeah.
And I bring it to, well, there are two things. One, Kamampangans are known for cooking the best Filipino food. That's contentious probably for other people in other parts of the Philippines, but there's just a lot of rich history there, a lot of culinary traditions that form the backbone, I think, of what people consider Filipino food.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the food was good. Of course, the food was delicious.
Food was
Um,
incredible.
But also, I think because there was a little bit more there, I think people are curious about the people behind what they're consuming, and
Yeah.
so giving a lot more of that, I think, gave people a lot more value in the experience.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think people either really, I think we found there were fans. There are people who were Filipinos who were experiencing their food, something that was very familiar for them, in a somewhat unfamiliar way that made, and for a lot of people, we were doing it in a very artful way, in a way that really honored the tradition and the ingredients, and it gave them a lot of pride for what we do, what our food culture is. And then there were other people who really loved what we did because it was such a great introduction if you had no idea what Filipino food was.
Right.
And for me, that was one of the biggest things that drove me to do what I did, especially with how I approached the flavors, was just like, I don't want people to think that Filipino food is just lumpia and pancit. There's a lot of different food cultures there, a lot of different flavors and traditions. And
Mm-hmm.
if I get to be your first taste, then I want to show you the whole spectrum.
Every time my friends visit Boston and they're asking for Rex, I'm like, oh yeah, you should definitely go to Tanám. And so I was really surprised to find out that Tanám shut down. Was it earlier this year?
Yeah, January, actually, right at the beginning.
How did you make that decision?
That one was a tough one for sure. The pandemic happened, so this is a slow burn decision, right? So
Mm-hmm.
things get to a point. So the pandemic happened. Our model initially depended on strangers being seated at one table, 10 people at a time.
Yeah.
And so that meant things that aren't possible in a pandemic world, which is sitting in small spaces with strangers, sharing food while you're eating hands with strangers. That's just not a thing. And so we really had to rethink what we were doing. So kind of there are two places where I feel things shifted towards close. One I'll put actually right at the beginning of the pandemic. It wasn't enough for me to feel like we should close, but I was, oh, this is a decision that we're making that's taking us further away from what we said we were coming to do, which was to just focus on the Filipino food aspect, just the Kamayan, and forget trying to create these coursed menus. I think that meant a lot of things. It actually meant that we doubled our income. There was a couple innovations that happened during the early pandemic. One was shifting the way that we did seatings, and then the other was creating a way to have this experience at home. People really loved. You didn't get to do this because you came to visit the restaurant, but for people who weren't comfortable yet, we used to do a 16-inch pizza box, cover that in banana leaf, and then plate a whole thing in there for you, and then have that delivered. And people love that around here. So we were able to kind of double our staff. People were able to take more breaks, including me. But when we got to the end of 2022, the situation was a little different. Our group had changed. People left. New people had come in.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that was really clear for me is that I didn't want to do this without peers. And so when throughout that time, I was trying to build that capacity internally. I wasn't looking for people who to just bring on that to run the business.
Right.
And there's this is learning for me, right? So it wasn't really working for the people that I trusted to take that on. They were more restaurant people than people who wanted to run a restaurant, I guess.
Right.
And so after a lot of internal discussion. That decision was made by consensus. But in the end, obviously, not externally and internally, the sense
Mhm.
was I was the one in charge of this project. If I wanted to, I could have done it without the people that I was leaning on, but that was a hard boundary for me. If it was going to come to that, then that would mean that my life would be 80 plus hours a week again, and that's just not where I wanted to go back. And so
Mhm.
it was an easy decision and a hard one at the same time.
And you got another James Beard nomination after that decision.
Yes. Um, we had made that decision to close, and maybe a week afterwards found out what that list was. And I remember my phone getting blown up because, of course, I wasn't paying attention anymore. They're like, what the hell? You are nominated for Best Chef Northeast. And I was floored. It honestly, it made me see what could have happened if we had
Mhm.
been open.
Mhm.
And not gonna lie, I was feeling a little resentful. And it did turn out the way that it did, but it was still really great to be included in that way and feel okay, actually the door here is still open. If Tanam Boston is ending, that doesn't mean the idea of Tanam has to stop, because it still matters to people. And
Yeah.
that's mutual, it still matters to me. So
Mhm.
it's still something I want to keep the door open for. I don't know if it's going to be a restaurant. I think
Pop-ups?
when it might be pop-ups. I don't miss some of the what pop-up life looks, because
Mhm.
folks who've never done it before, it's super fun. It's a really great way to do experimentation. I really suggest it for anyone who wants to start any food project, because I think more than anything, and maybe this is just me coming from that experimental sort of background in science, it's just like, you just got to try a thing. Make your best guess, try it, and then change the process and do it better next time. But I feel pop-ups are definitely a way that I want to continue experimenting with Tanam. I'm not sure if it's going to be now, but what I'd really like to do is bring back what we did previously, which was collaborations with artists to kind of form this narrative that brings together both food and art in a meaningful way for an experience that's really more about connection and dialogue.
Mhm. With the Tanam story, because I was also a photographer for a while, and I think I don't know, maybe this is just an age-old question, but I feel like when you're an artist and you're doing something that's really meaningful to you, but then you want to share it out more into the world and like turn it into a business, then there's this push and pull between like, what you originally set out to do that maybe doesn't necessarily make money, and then what is commercializable and like, what is friendly to a retail audience. And did you ever feel that your with your experiences either in arts directing or with Tanam too?
Yeah, I think I built the model for Tanam in a way that maximized my ability to stay honest to myself, because we only had to have 10 people in at a time. And we only needed to convince 10 people this was a good idea. There are other restaurants. I don't know if this number has shifted. A little restaurant wisdom for folks is that 72 is a number that's been thrown out as the ideal number of seats that you have in a restaurant. It's going to get you
Is
the most
that
money.
is that a common knowledge thing, like 72 seats in your restaurant,
Uh,
the golden
I think
number?
I don't know. I don't know if it is, but from a couple of people that I've talked to who have opened multiple restaurants, it's the number that's been shared. I haven't confirmed it, but I was okay. 72. Going to note that for the next time.
Yeah, I'll do 10.
I'm still going to do 10. Yeah, I think I've thought about this a little bit. It's a tough thing, right? I know that people have tried to start doing something that they love, make it into a business, and realize they hate it because it gets turned into something else than what they expected. But a lot of that, I think, is about honesty with yourself. I think you have to be real about what you value about what you're doing. And you also need to be real about what legacy you want to leave. And so maybe those are bigger questions than people think about. But I honestly think if why you what you're doing and what sort of impact you want to have, that conversion, sorry, that intersection is actually the place where you're going to find your answers. I'll also say that that helps with being able to stick it out, because it does get hard. it's going to suck. You're going to need to be consistent. And if you can keep leaning on that and knowing this is what I value about this is the thing I want to put out in the world, then you can get through that. It gets at some philosophy I have about how you think about life. I think it's really it's true that there is suffering. There's going to be suffering. If you get to choose that by doing it for something that you believe in, then your life feels a lot better. I feel like even though I'm not running the restaurant right now, what it's given me is a lot of content in like the decisions I'm making.
Yeah.
So yeah, does all that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I think it's also 'cause there are so many external factors that are related to what you're doing that you can just never be in control of. But if you're always working in accordance with your values and what's important and what you believe in, then you're always going to find contentment because at least you're living your life and you're doing the things in
Yeah,
the way that is most important to you.
and I think I mean in terms of the practicality of it, it actually means that you find your best supporters, the people who are really going to be allies. Of course, in doing something weird, what we did at Tanám, there were a lot of people who told us, this is a weird idea. This isn't how it's done. This isn't
Hmm.
going to make it. But in those conversations, I was eventually able to find people who are, yes, that sounds amazing. I want to make that happen. I have the expertise. And I'd say actually something that I learned in all of that was just how important your relationships are. So you're in relationship with lots of different people. You have no idea how they'll show up for you later or how you'll show up for them. And so I think being open to talking to people about your what you're doing is going to also help you find the people who are going to make that thing possible. So
Yeah.
I'll just give an example, something that we put a lot of energy into, and also something that we won awards for was for the way that the space was designed. And so all that was all that kind of kicked that or snowballed that into something that was the restaurant was a conversation with some friends who are architects. And I was like, hey, do you have any architects in your circles who might be interested in building a restaurant? I'm interested in, I'm actually not interested in building a restaurant. I'm interested in building a place that helps people connect. And they were like, we will do that. And it just you if you are honest about what you love, I think it actually also gives other people a chance to feed into that infectious energy and
Yeah.
see them as part of that.
And speaking of something that you love, I cannot end this podcast without talking about your ice cream situation. Both your birthday ice cream flavors and also Vice cream.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I am so obsessed with ice cream. I think so. I haven't done it. I didn't do it this year, but since I was 26, I've had this tradition of making as many ice cream flavors as years I'm celebrating on my birthday.
Hmm.
And it's led me to, it's basically just a way to get my friends to eat weird stuff. I've experimented with a lot of different things. One year I got really into thinking about substances actually. And so there was a tobacco ice cream. That's already a thing that is done. That was my gateway, I think.
The
I also
gateway
made
drug.
it was the gateway drug, the gateway ice cream. I think from there I made spliff cream and I made vice cream. So vice cream is particularly a mushroom tincture ice cream. I think I didn't get to taste it until I was floating on a lake. So that was a big first experience to try and have a mushroom on a lake.
So you were just floating in a lake or on a boat in a
Yeah,
lake,
we were actually on a bunch of floaties in the middle of the lake, and it was summer. And so that
eating
group of people,
psychedelic ice cream.
yeah, we that group goes hard with the snacks. So we took a whole cooler full of different sorts of things and just all sat back and ate this ice cream in the water. But
That's amazing.
yeah, I mean, it's something that I feel was really fun for folks because there's not a lot of ways to have that and to be able to have it in a way that you're not going to taste the mushroom flavor because that can be something that people really don't. It's just a great way to have those same effects. Yeah, I think if you don't use a tincture, you can end up getting a little sick. So there's definitely what had to be a little finessing in there to make sure people were going to feel good after having the ice cream.
And what have been some of your favorite ice cream flavors that you've made?
So I think maybe one of my most favorite was one of my first ones was a kimchi apple sorbet. Actually,
Mm,
that one was really good for it gave you that similar vibes to that Mexican mango spicy sort of flavor,
yeah.
but with gochujang. I think the other thing, the other flavors I've really liked have been more recently have been more in the cocktail space. So I've been playing a lot with how you create a full sort of cocktail experience in an ice cream.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so they're just more experimentations. I think there's also another ingredient that I've really liked. I can't remember the name of it now, but are you familiar with buza? Buza, it's a type of Mediterranean way of doing ice cream.
Okay.
It's so there's an ingredient that you put in it to make it almost sticky, so it pulls cheese a
Oh,
little.
Turkish ice cream?
Yes,
Okay.
that is it exactly. So I've also been kind of experimenting with that.
That sounds fun. I'll have to remember your birthday each year so I get invited to this ice cream tasting.
Yeah, I mean, just make it out to Boston in late May, and you'll definitely get that invite.
Okay, next year. So
Sounds
what are you
good.
up to now? What are you working on after Tanam?
Yeah,
Resting, chilling.
rest for sure. I mean, honestly, after Tanam ended, I didn't really know what I was going to be up to, but I think I had a lot of conversations with folks. I really thought I this is a there's not a lot of times in your life where you get to really think about like, okay, what am I going to do next? And so I think turning it into an opportunity to really dive in was important for me in figuring out what was going to happen next. But I definitely moving away from food for now. Well, I'm sorry, not exactly food, but away from restaurant. I'm still interested in food and it's going to show up always in some way from this point, I believe. But I learned to code. I learned to code. I'm now, I guess, a full stack software engineer. That's a little weird to say, but
Yeah, she does it
I'm
all.
it's honestly been really cool to learn. It feels like a new medium to
Totally.
create something that is very different from restaurant where I was creating these intimate sort of experiences and now maybe making something that's going to end up in the pocket of a few million or more. So it's I haven't figured it out yet, but I'm really interested in seeing how I bring in that ex- experience of intimacy into what I'm doing if I'm reaching that many people. Can I do that with that many people as opposed to the 10 that I had in one room?
Right.
So that's going to be my new little challenge. I think that looks potentially something more obviously commercial, but I'm definitely really looking into something that felt like a dream of mine for Tanam, which is to create you basically work with creative programmers, which I guess I can do that to make an experience that extends outside of the restaurant so people can interact with the themes and sort of explorations that are happening there even if they're not present. So
Right.
we'll see. I think
Yeah,
I think it's gonna be a good time.
that's exciting. As a last question, how have you found that your past experiences have helped inform what you're currently working on? Or how has your experience as a researcher or arts director or restaurant owner played a part in how you do things and how you think now?
It's all definitely rolled into each other. It's all informed what's happened afterwards. So some really basic ways that science ended up in my work kind of moving forward and will continue to add value to work that I do from this point is in documentation, experimentation, smart experimentation, and being consistent about trying to get to something that feels a little far away. I think that's
Mhm.
all that I learned from science. The obviously I'm probably not going to use any of the techniques that I learned in a neuroscience lab, but the ways of thinking, that logic is something that's pretty invaluable for me. Arts definitely open the door to collaboration a lot more. We were doing a lot of collaborating in that lab, but just really thinking about what it looks when you have multiple smart, interesting people in one room and what they can do together and how you can support them in making something that none of them thought was possible. I think I had a lot of practice in that in arts that continues to be part of what I do going forward, no matter what role I have. Like every conversation I'm having with people that I'm working with, I'm looking to see how do we bring you into this. And yeah, the restaurant, oh man, that just ended. So how does that fit in? I am so curious to find out. But I think a lot of it is just comes down to not thinking a little bit beyond just these skills that you're learning that are industry specific and
Mm-hmm.
bringing from those experiences the things that will serve you going forward. That's leadership, that's organization, knowing how to collaborate, knowing how to communicate. Those are all super basic things that no matter how if you're moving vertically or horizontally, that is going to be stuff that's going to inform and be useful for you in your future. I know for me coming into software engineering, it's been over 10 years since I even really looked at a computer like that. So I I was personally unsure about what was going to happen, if it made sense for me to even bring up all of this stuff. But in having conversations with people who do hiring and also all of that, and also are working in the field, those sorts of experiences, you would be surprised to know how much they matter. You just need to think about I think it's really just being about observation of yourself about, okay, what did I actually take with me? So I think there's lots of value in trying to do what you want to do, because it's less about this trajectory, this escalator, but thinking about value, the sorts of things that you want to learn, things that you want to become better at, and finding those spaces and seeing those different experiences as additions to a repertoire that's a little bit more varied, but very rich.
Ellie, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm honored to be maybe the first one to have you share your story after Tanam, and so excited to see what you're up to next.
Thanks, Maggie. I'm excited to have another conversation with you once I know a little more.
Yes, of course. And if you're interested in connecting with Ellie, I'll link all of her socials down below as well.